Just one glass of wine, burned through $900 million and an entire empire. That night, in front of more than 200 VIP guests, a brown-skinned man had a full glass of red wine thrown straight onto his gray suit. No one apologized. No one stopped it. Laughter burst out. Camera flashes kept firing, and the mocking words stabbed into him like needles. Do your job, staff. How did someone like him even get into VIP? But no one knew. The man they humiliated was actually the hidden owner of the $900 million deal that was supposed to be signed later that very night. When he turned and walked away, silent, cold, his eyes darkening as if shutting an invisible door, the entire room had no idea that their fate had ended in that exact moment. Just one more phone call, and everything would collapse. What happened next will shock you. Before we begin, remember to like, share, and subscribe. And I'm truly curious, where are you listening to this story from? Leave a comment telling me where you're watching this. I love seeing how far our story travels. People often say, one mistake can change a life. But that night, one single glass of wine changed the fate of an entire $900 million empire. It happened so fast that even time itself seemed to stop for a beat. The red wine, rich with the scent of ripe berries and oak, fell onto Eli Turner's gray suit like a streak of blood spreading over snow, a gentle flick of the wrist, yet cruel. The crimson liquid slid down the fabric, clinging to each fiber as if it wanted to stay and witness what was about to unfold. 200 guests in the hall went dead silent. Only the click-click of phones recording the scene remained, as if everyone feared missing the moment of humiliation. Cold whispers curled through the air like toxic wind. Look, a server daring to stand in the VIP area. Some people really don't know their place. The pain of contempt doesn't draw blood, but it cuts into a person like a dull blade, slow, deep, and hard to heal. Eli stood still for 1 second, just one, but long enough for his eyes to darken, like someone had just blown out a small flame inside him. Not because of the wine, not because of the stain, but because of a familiar feeling he had endured thousands of times, simply because of the color of his skin. Then he turned away. No reaction, no argument, not even a glance at those who had poured the arrogance of the entire world onto him with that one careless gesture. His silence froze the room, a silence heavy enough to bend the air, a silence like the sound of a door about to slam shut behind all of them. No one knew that the man they dismissed as someone standing in the wrong place was the very person holding absolute power over the $900 million deal the crowd was celebrating that night. No one knew that with every step Eli walked away, he was pulling their future away with him. Behind him, the music kept playing. The laughter tried to sound natural, but no one realized. The storm had already begun the moment that wine touched Eli's suit. They just didn't know it yet. When the door closed behind Eli's footsteps, it felt as though the room finally regained its breath. But they didn't know. The one who had just walked out was not merely a service staff member, but the last pillar holding that gala night together. The atmosphere inside the Skyline Imperial Tower continued pretending to be elegant, as if the red wine stain were merely a small streak of rain on glass. But that illusion could not erase the chill that had just brushed past. Like a figure crossing the threshold carrying a gust of biting wind. That night was the Gala of Prestige, an event often compared to the golden heart of the city. The Skyline Imperial Tower loomed tall against the night sky, its crystal chandeliers shimmering like constellations, imprisoned inside glass cages. The marble walls were cold, polished to the point where you could see even the smugness reflected in the eyes of those who walked in. Live jazz music rippled through the air, slithering like a silk serpent caressing the listener's ears. The scent of expensive perfume mingled with the sear of charred steak, dissolving into the air like a gentle reminder that scarcity did not exist here. But that luxury was only a thin mask. Beneath the glittering lights lay a hidden reef of prejudice, a place where people examined skin color before meeting someone's gaze, judged a suit before even knowing a name. Every step on the glossy wooden floor echoed with arrogance, as if proclaiming, "Only those like us deserve to be here." And in that breathtakingly beautiful space, a darkness was waiting to reveal itself, because Eli hadn't gone far, and what was about to happen would turn the Skyline Imperial Tower from a monument of prestige into the fastest falling tower in its own history. The glamour inside the Skyline Imperial Tower continued swallowing every gaze, yet among the sea of people drowning in jewelry and pride, the image of the man who had quietly left the room still echoed. His silence hung in the air like a heavy comma, a sign that this story was far from over. And to understand what was about to unfold, we must look back at the man everyone had mistaken. Eli Turner appeared at the gala in a simple ash-gray suit, made of soft fabric, neatly tailored. No logos, no ostentation. Yet it felt more honest than every $10,000 tuxedo in the room. His brown skin gleamed under the warm lights, like a piece of night brought into the middle of a celebration. Tall frame, broad shoulders, steady steps. At a glance, he didn't attract attention. But if one looked closely, there was something in his eyes, like an evening breeze drifting across a field once scorched by wildfire. Quiet, but beneath it lay scars that had never healed. Right at the entrance, a security guard had stopped him. The man's voice was sharp as a raw slicing knife. "Where are you delivering to?" The question seemed harmless, but it was the familiar cut Eli had endured since childhood. And as always, he simply smiled. A faint smile, thin as a sheet of paper, covering a burn far deeper than anyone thought. Because Eli was used to it, used to being judged by his skin before anyone saw the person, used to suspicious eyes, used to swallowing words he wanted to say just to avoid trouble. Except tonight, he had no intention of swallowing anything else. And those who had mistaken him were about to face consequences far greater than they imagined. Eli took a few more steps into the grand hall, but what awaited him wasn't any better. At the Skyline Imperial Tower, the brighter the crystal lights glowed, the sharper the scrutinizing looks lurking in the shadows became. And for someone used to being mistaken like he was, every step felt like walking on tiles sprinkled with tiny shards, polished on the surface yet cutting silently beneath. Two women in evening gowns glided past, their perfume thick enough to feel like a veil of expensive mist filling the air. But when they saw Eli, they halted for half a second, then almost instinctively tugged their dresses slightly aside, as if afraid his shadow might touch them and stain the silk they were wearing. Prejudice had footsteps of its own, and Eli knew them by heart. A man in a porcelain white suit suddenly cut sharply into his path, his voice carrying a hint of joking, yet dripping with contempt. "Let the staff go first." The words were as light as air, but to Eli, they felt like an invisible cut, another slice in the thousand he had grown accustomed to having carved into him by life. He simply ordered a glass of water. No wine, no champagne, nothing that could make his heart pound faster than necessary. No one knew that beneath his calm exterior, a brewing headache throbbed like a drum against his skull. The kind of pain a doctor once held his hand and warned him about, speaking gently. "Eli, you need to avoid stress. Your heart won't withstand it." But life doesn't always give people the luxury of avoidance, especially not in a place where every gaze judged the color of his skin before the soul within it. And it was these prejudices, light as breaths, that were quietly pushing Eli toward the very edge of himself. After his first glass of water, Eli quietly positioned himself beside a stone pillar, as if trying to carve out a breath of space for himself, amid a sea of people pushing at him with their eyes. He was silent, but that silence only made the surrounding whispers seem louder. And then, the microphone clicked on with a sharp pop, like a signal that another performance was about to begin. The atmosphere in the room shifted. The gazes that had been fixed on Eli quickly spun toward the stage, where warm lights shone down like an invisible hand pulling open velvet curtains. Arrogance had arrived right on schedule. On stage, Aurora Grant stepped out first. Her crystal-studded white gown caught the light so brilliantly it made the entire hall flare up, as if drenched in liquid gold. Each of her steps flowed like cold water across the floor, smooth, beautiful, and impossibly distant. Right behind her was Damian Grant, CEO of Grant Tech, a man who always smiled as though the entire city revolved around his orbit. With his dark suit and self-satisfied gaze, Damian looked no different from a king presiding over his own feast. They were preparing to announce a historic moment, a $900 million deal, with a mysterious investor everyone had heard rumors about, but no one had ever seen. The music swelled. Lights washed over them, as if applauding in advance. The crowd murmured in awe, as though they were about to witness a miracle, yet far off. In the dim corners untouched by the stage lights, that mysterious investor stood, silent, wearing a suit with no brand, and wrapped in the very disdain of the people waiting for him to sign and save them. No one knew that this glamorous announcement was about to become the most humiliating moment of their lives. The applause on stage still crashed like waves against a cliff, but in the shadowed corner where Eli stood, the air had thickened so much it felt like you could reach out and snap it in your hand. The glamour that had just stepped into the spotlight was like a fake sun, and like every blinding light, it only made the shadows beneath it longer, darker, and easier to trample. Aurora, with eyes accustomed to looking down on people, swept her gaze across the room as if choosing items from a menu. And then her eyes stopped, landed directly on Eli. A glance, thin, cold, carrying the same feeling as when someone notices a stain on a pristine white dress. She tilted her head slightly, whispering into her husband's ear. Damian listened, then let out a small smirk, the kind worn by someone who has lived his whole life knowing he stands above others. He left the stage with the air of someone clearing a path. The moment he reached Eli, Damian didn't bother hiding his irritation. This area isn't for staff to loiter. His voice was smooth as satin, but cold as metal. Eli lifted his face, his eyes still calm, like a lake unstirred. I'm just observing. Damian laughed, a thin kind of laugh, like a layer of ice on water, ready to crack the moment someone touched it. Observing? What could staff possibly have to observe here? People nearby instantly turned their heads. Their eyes drew into an invisible circle, like predators catching the scent of blood, waiting to see how the prey would react. Eli stood there, still silent, still breathing evenly. But in his eyes, something was shifting. A storm was forming. A storm that the very people mocking him did not understand they had summoned themselves. The silence between Eli and Damian lasted only a few seconds, but in the air, it echoed like an overstretched violin string, needing only the slightest pull to snap. And that pull came from Aurora. She stepped forward, the scent of expensive perfume rolling off her, as cold as early winter ice. Aurora stood before Eli, as though she were looking at something misplaced in the golden portrait she believed the room to be. Her eyes swept from his head to his shoes, slowly, calculatingly. Then, without another word, she took a glass of red wine from a server's tray. Her fingers held the glass with the elegance of a dancer, yet her gaze was sharp as a blade. She thrust it toward Eli's chest, her voice sweet but poisonous. Bring this to table 12, now. It wasn't a request. It was a command. The kind people use for those they believe were born to serve. Eli looked at the glass, but didn't reach for it. He didn't frown, didn't react. But that silence made Aurora bristle, as if she had been slapped by empty space. She drew in a sharp breath, but Damian was quicker. The man who was used to standing above others snatched the wine glass from his wife's hand, twisting his wrist lightly as though raising a toast. Yet what came next was cruel enough to chill bone. Damian lifted the glass high for his nearby friends to see, his lips curling into a mocking smile. A bit of color for the misplaced staff. Then he poured the entire glass of red wine onto Eli's chest. The wine was warm, sharp-scented. The sound, snap as the liquid hit fabric, ripped through the air. Laughter erupted, thundering like waves crashing against rock. Eli closed his eyes for 1 second. Just one. But in that second, he was fighting to keep his heart from tightening, as though someone were squeezing it shut. No one in the room knew that the moment the wine touched Eli was also the moment they had erased their own future with their very own hands. The last sound lingering in Eli's ears wasn't the laughter, but the drip of wine near his collar. Tick, tick, like an hourglass counting down to something about to collapse. The room behind him was still buzzing, but inside Eli, a freezing silence had formed. Quiet, heavy, like the sky suddenly darkening before the first thunder of the season explodes. He opened his eyes, not angry, not resentful, just empty. Eli turned away. No reaction, no glance back, not a single word, because sometimes words only cheapen the weight of pain. He walked past the same stairs that had mocked him seconds earlier, but now avoided him, as if afraid to brush against something they couldn't understand. The ballroom doors opened, and a cold breeze swept through, as if trying to wash the wine's scent off his skin. The hallway of the tower was eerily quiet. Warm lights stretching ahead like a path pulling him away from the world of prejudice behind him. Eli reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His fingers trembled slightly, partly because of his heart, partly because of the lump of hurt still lodged in his chest. His voice was low, sharp, and decisive. Cancel everything. Shut the system down. Release the statement immediately. The line went silent for half a beat, as if the person on the other end could feel the invisible explosion that had just begun. Yes, Chairman Turner. The last two words struck like a hammer against the fate of the entire tower. Eli tightened his grip on the phone, and in that moment, a searing pain shot from his chest up to his shoulder. His heart clenched, as if someone were driving a blade straight into it. He braced himself against the cold wall, breathing heavily, but his eyes stayed open, focused, unyielding, because he knew tonight wouldn't just stain his suit, it would change the entire sky for the people who chose the wrong man to humiliate. The banquet hall doors closed behind Eli, but his decision, that brief sentence spoken over the phone, still echoed like an invisible bolt of lightning ripping down the long corridor. Inside, the party continued pretending to be cheerful. The clinking of glasses, the forced laughter, the jazz music trying desperately to coax the atmosphere back into elegance. But once the sky has changed color, there is no storm that can turn back. And it began with light. The massive LED screen on the stage suddenly flickered, like the heart of the entire room had just suffered a violent spasm. Then, with a sharp pop, the light shifted entirely to red. White letters appeared, large, stark, cold as a death sentence. 900 million USD contract terminated. The whole ballroom froze. The laughter from moments earlier fell to the floor, shattering like glass. Aurora turned to Damien, her lips trembling as if refusing to believe what she was seeing. Damien looked as though someone had punched him straight in the gut. Breathless, stunned, voice lost. All around the room, phones began vibrating at once, a chaotic chorus erupting. Grant Tech's accounts are frozen. The stock is in freefall. Investors are pulling out. Legal emails are flooding in. And then, like gasoline thrown on flames, someone shouted, "Look, the video of him." A video started spreading from phone to phone. Not a rumor, not speculation. Real footage of Damien dumping a glass of red wine onto Eli. Aurora's contemptuous smile. The painful silence of a man they thought was just an employee. Whispers swept across the hall like wildfire. He's the real owner. And they humiliated him. Damien staggered backward. Aurora went pale, her nails digging into her husband's arm. The arrogant ones began looking around, eyes frantic, desperate like trapped animals suddenly realizing there was no way out. And this was only the beginning. of their collapse. The chaos in the room swelled like a tropical storm, waiting only for the wind to shift. Phone calls, hurried footsteps, someone choking on their own sobs. All of it fused into a harsh, discordant soundtrack of collapse. Then amid that cacophony, a voice cut through. Not loud, but sharp enough to slice the air itself. Everyone stop. It was Marcus Hale, the oldest member of the board, the man who had just received word from New York. He didn't shout. He spoke as if reading out a formal indictment. Marcus looked straight at Damien, eyes aged but burning with anger, disappointment, and a hint of fear. "Do you even know who you just insulted?" The whole room turned. The noise seemed to choke and die on the spot. Damien scoffed, clinging to whatever power he believed he still held. "I'm the CEO. I have the right, Ahame." Marcus slammed his hand onto the table. "No, tonight you don't." His voice wasn't raised, but it hit hard enough to make the wine glasses tremble. Damien froze. Aurora gripped her dress so tightly her knuckles whitened, her breath uneven. Marcus swept his gaze across the room before delivering the final blow. "The man you poured wine on is not an employee, not a delivery man, not someone you have any authority over." A silence fell, heavy, long, immovable as a slab of stone. Then he said it. That was Eli Turner, chairman of Northbridge. Damien's face drained from red to a bruised, sickly purple. Aurora's hands dropped to her sides. Hundreds of eyes in the room burst wide in shock. But Marcus wasn't finished. And Northbridge is the company acquiring all of Grant Tech. The room seemed to crumble. A scream rang out. Someone dropped a wine glass. Aurora's face turned ghostly pale. No one breathed. Because at last, they understood. Tonight, they didn't just lose a contract. They lost their future. All because they insulted the wrong man. The moment Marcus revealed Eli's true identity, the entire room felt as if its lifelong mask had been ripped away. The arrogant began to tremble. Those who mocked him that night no longer dared to look one another in the eye. And from that single fall, the next day unfolded like a sentence being read aloud. Before dawn could even touch the windows, the news had already swept across the internet. Headlines blazed like fire. Grant Tech CEO insults Northbridge chairman at gala. 900 million USD contract terminated on the spot. Grant Tech on the brink of collapse. Their stock plunged like a stone, losing its balance. Shareholders fled without looking back. Partners sent severance emails with only 2 icy words: "We withdraw." Inside their luxurious mansion, Aurora sat collapsed on the wooden floor, mascara smeared into 2 long black streaks, like exclamation marks stretched thin. Damien was no longer the powerful CEO from the night before, just a panicked man clutching his phone with shaking hands, calling every partner he could. Each call ended with a harsher rejection. "No, do not contact us again." By noon, they had only one hope left. A hope so fragile, it was almost absurd. They drove to Eli's house. No more glittering gown. No more polished suit. Just 2 exhausted, hollow faces. Aurora choked out, "Please, don't destroy us. We've lost everything." Damien stood behind her, mumbling like a fading shadow. "We were wrong. If you just say the word, we'll make it right." Eli stood at the doorway, simple, calm, without a trace of satisfaction at their downfall, as if he had seen all of this coming long ago. His voice was low, each word deliberate. "You didn't lose everything today. You lost it the moment you believed you had the right to step on someone else." Aurora blinked, and a single tear hit the floor. Eli stepped back into his home, delivering his final words. Soft, yet sharp as a blade. "Respect is the one thing you cannot buy, and you chose not to pay for it." The door closed. They stood outside, empty, cold, and for the first time in their lives, defeated by their own arrogance. After the door slammed shut, Aurora and Damien stood frozen, like 2 abandoned statues. The evening wind drifted through the hallway, carrying with it the cold sting of truth. It wasn't Eli who took everything from them. They themselves had stepped off the edge the moment they chose to despise him. And from that very moment, the story shifted softly into another chapter. Eli turned and walked deeper into the house. No more pleading behind him. No more eyes questioning whether he deserved to stand where he stood. Only his own breath remained, heavy and aching like stones dropping in his chest. The pain in his heart surged again, sharp, stabbing like an invisible hand tightening around it. He pressed a hand to his chest, leaning against the wall, his shoulders trembling slightly. But this time, he smiled. A small smile, thin as a thread, but enough to keep him standing. Because he knew, last night, he did not let silence become surrender. He did not let a system built on prejudice push him back into the shadows the way it once had. He stood up, not with fists, but with intellect and dignity. Sunlight streamed through the window, catching the faded stain of red wine still spread across his vest. What had once been a symbol of humiliation now looked almost like a badge, a reminder that sometimes injustice is not an ending, but a fulcrum, a lever to flip the entire board. Outside, the Grant family still stood in bitter silence, where, for the first time, they understood a lesson money could never buy. Respect is not a privilege. It is an obligation, Eli whispered softly, not for them to hear, but for himself. Never underestimate a quiet person. Silence is when they are calculating. He drew the curtains open. Light spilled in. A new chapter began for him, not built on revenge, but on freedom. There are wounds that never bleed, yet they change the way a person walks. There are insults that seem harmless, yet they are the final stone that brings an empire crashing down. Eli's story isn't told, so we can clap our hands in satisfaction, because the wicked were punished. It is told to remind us that respect is the only key capable of opening the door to every relationship, and injustice always finds its way back to where it began. In this life, we never truly know who the person we look down on is, what they have endured, or what power they might quietly hold. But there is one thing we always know with certainty. Our dignity lies in how we treat others. Be kind, be humble, and remember, sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who holds the power to turn the entire room upside down in a single second. If you want to hear more stories that expose prejudice, overturn injustice, and make your heart tremble, don't forget to follow. We still have so many truths to tell you, truths society often tries to hide.